So here we've got my pattern piece, we've got the folded edge here, and you can see this is the extra that I've left on the bottom just to neaten that hem off, and that's the extra little bit that I've just left on the side there. So I've just left about 1/4 of an inch just to work with that. So let's take our pins out. I've got my notches marked. Have I just check? Yes. So I've got the notch 2 centimetres in from my pattern piece. The next one is going to be corresponding with the side seam when we attach this to the skirt, so that one's a really important one. And then I've got one here at the centre back. Did I put a notch at the centre back here? Yes, I've got a notch on my centre back there as well, not on my lining though. Let me just pop that on because we need that one on the lining as well, don't we? Make sure that's all nice and neat together. Right, okay, take these pins out, Claire. Pattern piece to one side. So the next thing that I do is to make it nice and easy, work out which is the top of your fabric and which is the right side. So that's my right side, and then I just put a pin just on the top edge, just because it just helps me navigate myself really easily. So if I know the pin's on the top edge, then I know where I am. So the first thing that we're going to do is on the skirt, Sarah in the book tells us to neaten this edge, but what I want us to do is I want us to fold in that 1/4 of an inch that we've done first, and then we're going to then just place a crease mark with the iron on that first notch. Can't see it very well on mine, but with the stripes, but all the way down. We're just going to do that all the way down to make that nice and neat. So follow your stripe because that'll keep it straight. So just to reiterate, I'm going to turn over 1/4 of an inch first, and then I'm going to then turn over another 1/4 of an inch, okay, and press it. I'm not going to sew it at this point, I'm just going to press it, and I'm going to do the same. So I'm folding that towards the inside of the dress, okay. So we've got the pin, as you can see from the pin, that again, this just helps you orientate things, doesn't it? And we're just going to do that on both sides. Let me just go and press that, and then I'll come back. So let's just do this from this side. And we're literally just going to hold that, we're just pressing that, tacking with our stitches, that hem down. It's not a hem, it's the side seam, but you know, it's the centre front really, but it's just neatening it off. Just follow your stripes so you get it nice and neat. I did reverse stitch at the bottom there, it doesn't really matter, but because it's all going to be enclosed in other seams anyway. Oops, that's it. So I'm just doing the 1/4 of an inch that we turned over, just to kind of tack it down. So what we're going to do then is locate where the top of your skirt is, and we've got the pin here so we know where that is. And what I want you to do is where you've folded your 2-inch seam allowance in, you know, you're facing in on the front of your skirt, I want you to, that was wrong sides together, and we've just sewn that little neatening edge down. What I want you to do is just now fold it back on itself so that you've now got that creased edge just on the inside there. You should still be following the same pleat down, and just put a pin level with the hem. And then just put a pin about 3 centimetres above that. So making sure you're on your crease. Follow your stripes. Because what we actually need to do then is we need to just tack this facing down, not tack, but sew it down at 2 centimetres. So if we get my seam gauge on here, that's 2 centimetres to there. So if I put this third pin in between those other 2 pins that are holding it still for me, then that will tell me where I need to sew. So that's what we've got in the end. So the red pins are just anchoring down the hem for me so that it doesn't twist. And so that should be the same distance at both parts. And the white pin is actually where I'm going to stitch. And I'm only going to stitch from this hem to the edge of the facing, and then I'm going to stop. So you're not going all the way around the skirt, you're just going on this bit. And this is on the, just to confirm, that there's my pin showing the top of my skirt. And this is on the bottom of the skirt by the hem. So we're just sorting out the hem at this moment in time. So I'm just going to take my pin out there where I was just marking at the 2 centimetre. And it is important because you want your hem to finish at the right point on the skirt. So do take the time to measure that to make sure that it's going to be equal on both sides. And you can take the other 2 pins out. So let's go back to the other side now. So again, this is our facing, and that's the right side where the fold is, and we're going to undo this facing and turn it back on itself so that we've got right sides together at that point. And then making sure that we're following the same crease, same stripe that we're on. Let's put a pin at the hem to hold it still, and then another pin about 3 centimetres up so that that's holding that pleat. It's hard for you to see on the stripes, but there's the bit behind, look, just holding it down. And now I'm going to measure my 2 centimetres and put a pin in, just to hold that steady. And then I'm going to now just sew where that pin is. Just reverse and then go back, and that'll just hold that steady for you. And take those pins out. So that's what you should be left with. Okay, so we're going to trim off this corner now to the edge of the facing at an angle, and then I'm going to take off the edge of the seam allowance as well. So let's do that again. This is the bottom edge of our hem. So we're going to take it off at a diagonal just before our stitches, and then this loose flappy bit, we're just going to take that off as well. So that's the hem of the skirt, and that's where we are. So now if we fold over the hem and push that round and just get our seam gauge just to point it out nice and flat, we've got a nice edge there on the edge of our skirt. This is all in the instructions already, so I am just following this from the instructions. So just pass that out. And then what we're going to do next is we're just going to go along and we're going to fold up the 2 centimetres on our skirt, and we're just going to tuck in a small edge underneath there. So we've just got 1/4 of an inch tucked under on our seam. So I'll just go and press that, and then I'll come back to you. So I've had a little break, as you do in these things, and what I remembered was that we'd actually allowed a little bit extra on this side for this hem. So we're actually going to be turning up 2 centimetres and 1/4 centimetre, so well, 1/4 of an inch. So apologies if you've already sewn yours, but I'm just going to redo these stitches because I've already cut it off, so I couldn't get away without telling you. Excuse me. So let's pop the machine back on again, and all I'm going to do is leave those original stitches in, but I'm just going to go up another 1/4 of an inch because that was the extra that I left, if you remember, on my... We cut out extra, didn't we, on our skirt pieces. So just do that and just reverse. Because then if I snip those threads off, having remembered what I was doing, then we can still turn that up, and it's not going to alter anything at all, other than it gives us the extra 1/4 of an inch that we need to create that seam. So let's just push that seam through there. I've not cut off any more, and I've not undone those other stitches because they're going to be hidden underneath. You can do if you want to and just trim it down further. It's up to you. but I don't think it's necessary. But if you want to be neat, then you can do. So let me just do this side as well. I'll do that off camera, and then what I'm going to do is turn the corners round as you just saw, and then take it to the machine, and I'm going to turn over 1/4 of an inch first, and then I'm mixing up more my measurements, aren't I? Talking between centimetres and inches all the time. I do apologise for that. It's just the way my head works. So I'm turning over probably 1/2 centimetre and then 2 centimetres up to give us this deep trim, because the line of the hem is going to be the line for attaching the ribbon shortly. So we're nearly at adding the ribbon stage. So we need to have that line that we're going to be following to be able to attach the ribbon. So I hope all that makes sense, and my apologies. So all I've done is an extra quarter of an inch on here, or 1/2 centimetre. I'm going to do the other side as well, and then turn it up, and then that will still give us then the 2 centimetre hem that Sarah wants in the book, but we'll have turned over to fully neaten that edge first, and I'm going to press it all. It'll all become clear. Apologies for confusing you. Okay, so I've just been and pressed mine, and as we can see, it's looking all nice and neat, and importantly straight. But the most important places where you need to make sure that you've only got your 2 centimetres is at the very beginning here, and at the very end here. So make sure that they're absolutely spot on your 2 centimetres, because what we're going to do with our ribbon trim is that's going to be fixed on, but we're going to be following the line of our hem in order to give us that placement line. And if that's wavy, then that will send the eye off. But also where the skirt overlaps at the front here, you need those 2 pieces of ribbon to sit absolutely on top of each other, because that's going to be wrapped around there, and you want the other piece to come on here. So you want the bottom of the hem to be perfect, and we want this ribbon trim just to run on seamlessly onto each other. So like here, look, we've got one piece there, so that when we butt those up together against each other, can you see how that just carries on perfectly at the same level? So if one's over the top of the other, you can't really see it joined there, and also the other way around as well, that it's all at the level. And this hem is what's going to give us that. So it's worth taking that extra time just to make sure that you've got your hem straight. Obviously, if you go a bit wavy at the back, it's not going to matter quite so much, but obviously you prefer not to. But we just need to make sure that we've got that straight. The other thing that I'm going to suggest is that you don't go right up to the edge here with your hem at this moment in time, because what we can do is when we're attaching this is we can tuck it in under there and then fold it back on itself. Tuck the ribbon under there and fold it back on itself, and we can line it up, and that will then make sure that that edge there stays underneath and is really nice and neat and isn't ever going to poke out. So again, it's just little finishing techniques that rather than your ribbon end there and then it possibly fray in the future, we're actually going to tuck our ribbon underneath in another step, but not just yet. So what I want you to do now is don't sew over your facing here. So that's the front of the skirt. This is the top of the skirt. This is the hem. Don't sew over that facing. Just come in about, how much am I going to come in? About 1 inch from the edge, and start there. And we're just going to put 1 row of stitching down here in the white first, on the very edge of this hem turned in hem here. So literally like 1/8 of an inch in from the edge of the hem, if that, maybe even 1/16. Just catch the very edge of that hem. Try and keep it neat and try and keep it straight. So just set yourself up for success. So I'm going to move my needle across to the left hand side of my presser foot, because then I can know that I can follow the line and keep it nice and neat. Let's pop this in. I've not got any pins in because I think the folded edge on this cotton will work really well. But if you've got a fabric that keeps springing, make sure you've put your pins in. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to run the edge of my presser foot here on the edge of the folded edge here. And that's what I'm going to keep my eye on, because then my needle should always catch into the work. It'll all make sense. She keeps saying that, don't I? Sorry. Okay, so keep this nice and straight. Find your pedal. Let's do a couple of stitches and a couple of stitches back. Oh, I should have taken my stitch length up to 3 as well, because we're top stitching really, aren't we? But just keep this nice and straight. And we're just wanting to catch that fold where it's been turned over. And I can hear the rattle on my bobbins. That's getting near the end. Hopefully I've got enough to do this hem and I'll redo a bobbin. So just nice and steady, and I'm just keeping my eye on where the bobbin's going through, and I'm getting a nice even stitch right very close to the edge. I've done it in white, we'll be able to follow it. We're going to go over that stitch anyway with the navy blue when we start to sew the ribbon on, or our contrast, whatever colour you're using. But we've just not, if you can see, I've just started proud that inch in from the side, but when we sew the trim on, that's going to go right to the edge. But this just gives us the ability to tuck those ends in and make them nice and neat. That's the theory anyway. So just take your time. If you wobble, just stop, unpick your stitches and then rejoin them. Coming to the end. Now I'm just going to just do a reverse stitch, just a little way from the edge. That's all we need to do. Because we're just tacking that line down. We're giving ourselves a line to follow, which is the aim of the exercise. Okay. So when you finish, this is what you should end up with. You've got a row of stitches going across there and your row on the front. Now is the time just to put these 2 edges together and just make sure that those lines are on the same level. Oh, let me get into the edge here. Let me just tip you down a little bit more. 1 second. Don't want to make anybody feel sick. So, bottoms of my hems match. The top of my skirt matches. And if we follow that line across, that skirt would be on the same point. That level of stitching would be on the same level there. Okay, so that's what we need. So the next thing we're going to do then is choose what colour you're going to actually do your stitching in. Now I suggest you to use a complementary colour to coordinate in. So I'm going to use a navy blue on here. Now it would be tempting to put white or leave white in the bobbin, but I've had experience before, especially on dark colours, that when you start sewing, sometimes the bobbin thread gets pulled up into the top of your work and it shows that thread. So I'm going to use navy blue in both my top and the bottom. I think all things considered, a row of navy stitching underneath here, or 2 rows by the time we've got the actual second stitch, because we're going to do a stitch on the top and a stitch on the bottom. If your ribbon's very narrow, I'm not quite sure how wide they want 1/4 inch trim. What's this one? Okay, this is, yeah, this is more than that, slightly wider. So if you've only got a 1/4 inch trim, you may choose just to do 1 line of stitching down the middle, but because this is going to flap around a bit, I'm actually going to do a row of stitching top and bottom on here, on mine. So I'm going to change my threads for navy, top and bobbin and my top thread. Obviously on this one here, I just did white stitching. Where's my quick unpick? So I've got a row of stitching here and a row of stitching just here. So hopefully you can see that just anchors down that. It leaves the little scalloped edge free, but from a distance you won't see it. And I've gone through the flower there, but if I was trying to do it like this one, look, where it just starts on the edge of the scallop. That one's gone in a little bit further, but it's still a good sew, so I didn't think I needed to undo it. So let me just get my machine set up with my new thread and I'll be back with you. Hold on 1 second. Okay, so I've got my machine, oops, sorry, cut the wire. Got my machine all set up now with my thread. And what we want to do now, I'll use my silk pin still, is we want to tuck the end of the ribbon inside. Now if you know how much you've turned under, you might want to just press that and then press another one at 2 centimeters just to give you the right amount. but I'm going to line up the bottom edge of the, as it is on the skirt, of the ribbon with the line of the stitching, and then I'm going to take it over the back there, just fold it with my finger so it's sitting nice and quietly, and as it should. Oops. And I'm going to put a pin in from the front in the direction of where I'm going to be sewing. I'll tell you what, I'll do it sideways and then I can get close to it, can't I? So you want that ribbon to sit on top of on top of itself here, so that when we sew the first row, we're going to actually catch that edge, and then we're going to go onto the same line as our stitching, because when we sew our ribbon down, we're going to just cover our stitching line that we've made for our hem. So literally we're going to be applying some ribbon for about 1 inch and then stop and adjust, and then just sew it down, so that all the time we're just using that row of ribbon. This isn't a place where I would go along and pin it all in advance, because I think it's better to be able to see what you're doing. So as you can see, that's just pinned under nicely there, and we'll catch that on the edge and that will hold that in. This edge here, this folded edge, is flush with the edge of the skirt as well, so that's all nice and neat. And I've just got one pin just holding it in place so that it's not going to come untucked for me whilst I just sew that down. So let's have a go then. Oh no, you can probably see from there. So let's have my ribbon on the other side so that I know where I am with that. And this is a time to take it nice and slow. So we're going to I'm just going to have just the edge of the ribbon, and I've got my needle pushed right across to the left again. And I'm just going to do a couple of stitches to start off. My pin's in the way a little bit, and then a couple of stitches back just to anchor that down, and then a couple of stitches forward finally, and then my needle in my work. That's really important, and I can take that pin out now because that ribbon is anchored down. And I'm just going to now just lift up the edge of the ribbon, locate where my stitch line is for my hem, and literally put the edge of the ribbon so it's just touching over the top of that ribbon, of that stitching. Turn my speed down as well because I go nice and slow. So this is really worth going slow. So again, I'm just working a couple of inches in advance, just got my ribbon. Again, I just place it on with my finger. You don't want to go too far in advance. And if you wanted to, you could use your awl, which I've got here. I was just looking for it then. To just hold it down in front of the needle, just in place. So it's got no ability to move. And then just check it again, and a few more stitches. So this is how you're going to get this on really nice and neat. And if you've got a good match with your ribbon and your thread, then your stitches should hopefully be almost invisible. I am on a 3 stitch length, and yeah, that's going quite nicely on there. So I'm not pulling my ribbon tight. My ribbon just has to lie neatly on top of the skirt. And literally you can just offer it up and move it sideways until you're sure that it's just covering, and then you're just going to just sew down those few centimetres. Then stop again and just check. So it's very precise sewing, this is, but this is why we want it to be that way, because we want it to be really nice and neat. And I don't know if you can see, I mean, that's my threads just where I started off, but that's just caught down on one side now, just down near that edge. But with it being navy, you're not going to see it. So just carry on like that all the way along, and it will just hold it in place for you. And using that hem, that's why that hem needed to be really nice and straight, because we just wanted to make sure that it was going to be held down properly. I don't know if anybody's watching this who tried to fix the ribbon on before and didn't quite get it as neat as they wanted. Then let me know in the comments below if you found this to be easier, because I always want to know whether I'm overstressing a point or whether people have got it and understand, and whether it or not it does help. So if you go too far in advance, you give room for your machine to start and push your ribbon off centre. So that's why we're only doing a very small amount at a time, and then using our awl just to hold it in place for us as well. You can use your fingers if you've not got an awl, or you can also use the point of a quick unpick as well as an awl just to hold it. You don't have to go out and get any special equipment. just sometimes these things are nice to have, aren't they? So where's my all gone underneath here again, look. And then we're going to get down to the very end, and then we're going to neaten off the edge the same way as we started the first bit, but we'll do that in a minute. We've got to get closer to it so that we know how much we're working with. So let's stop there. Let's just readjust that ribbon. And I've also, if you've noticed as well, Sarah in the book, Sarah Peel, the author, she suggests doing this section after you've attached the skirt to the bodice. But what I found in my dressmaking is that if you can manage to sew any hems on your skirt, if you know what the length is going to be, before you put it onto the skirt and it's all gathered, you'll get a much better result just working in the flat like this, because it's just so much easier. So that would be one of my top tips as well. So we're starting to come down to the bottom now, back to the beginning. So let's just do a few more stitches. We don't want to go on top of the facing yet, we want to make sure that we're staying away from that facing. But we can bring the edge of this one around to make sure that when we come off the edge here, that we're at the same level. So we can just pull on the edge of the skirt and the ribbon to make sure that those are going to be the same. And I want to get as close as I can to the edge with those being the same. So it's just dipping slightly. I need to go up slightly. And you can just adjust it so that that's going to be right on the edge there and be perfect. Just move that ribbon slightly more. So I'm just overlapping the edges just to make sure that when that runs off it's going to be in the right place. Okay, so I'm just going to hold that in place with my awl at the moment and get a bit closer. But not over the edge, because I can lift up my presser foot. We're going to now snip off with scissors or your snips, and we need enough to go back on itself and to be tucked under, so probably about that much. Let me measure how much I've left at the end. 2¼ inches I've left. It might be a little bit more than we need, but we'll see. So what I'm going to do first of all is put a fold on the edge of the skirt. You can't do this in advance because you need to be able to know where everything is and what you're doing. That's probably a little bit extra than I needed. And I'm probably a bit close than I wanted to be. Okay, that's going to be annoying. Right, okay. So we need to take, so that's probably a bit more than we need. So let me take off about that much. How much have I taken off? So back up ½ inch, so probably 2 inches I've got. And I probably should have been further back and away from where I was. And what I want to do is, at 2 centimetre mark, make another fold. So about there. So that I can tuck that in. And that's probably still a little bit more, but I'd rather have too much than too little. So all I'm going to do now is just fold that under the edge of the ribbon, and I'm making this look very complicated, but if I'd have stopped further back it would have been fine, but I just don't want to undo that thread. Right, okay, so I've got that. Let me just double check this. So I've got my presser foot up, so I can just bring this side round, and I just want to make sure before we finish off that that's in the right place. Yes, it is. So I can straighten this out again now, put my presser foot down, make sure that ribbon is caught underneath, and I believe it is. Yes, it is. I think I just moved it. So it's a little bit fiddly doing this bit, but it's worth it to get it absolutely right. So yes, it needed to go down just slightly. Okay, hold it with my finger as well, and it's pinned on the back, so I know that's straight. Make sure it's all straight. And then we're going to just take a few more stitches forward. Okay, I'm going to take my pin out now because I know that I'm onto my facing. And then I'm going to go forward to the edge and then reverse. And that's just going to hold that down. Okay, so I made that look very complicated, And I'll show you in a second what we actually did. I'm not too worried. It's gone a little bit skewy on the back, but I didn't have a lot of room to work with. So what I wanted to do was to make sure that these were going to run onto each other perfectly. And what I should have done was start to adjust it further back, but I didn't. So you can learn from what I've done. But then what I've done is I've tucked the edge of the ribbon inside the hem. Hopefully you can get the gist. So now what we're going to do now is put it back in the machine again, because this side here is loose at the moment. I've just tacked down the one side, is now go back on the top edge of this row here and then just go down. If you'd wanted to do a decorative stitch, you could do a decorative stitch over the top. You can embellish it however you wish, but I just wanted that to be really just matching on nicely. And it was, I know it was a bit fiddly, but it was worth it. In my opinion, you decide whether you think it's worth it or not. Okay, so that's those threads off. So let's put this back into the machine again. I'm going to do from the other side this time. And to rejoin here. So a couple of stitches there, a couple of stitches back just to hold on to that. And now that we've got this in place, we can speed up a bit, because that ribbon, oh, not too fast though, because that ribbon isn't going to move. Obviously if you're using a really wide ribbon then it might, but this one should be fine. So just tay it on the edge. Try and keep your stitches as straight as you can. You end up with this beautifully sewn trim on the edge of your skirt. And as I say, much easier I think to work when it's in the flats like this before it's all gathered. Just reverse that and then we're done. Okay, so just take our threads off just really close to where we were. So you can see my tram lines on the back here with my hem and the original hem that we've got, how we followed it. Whoops, just dropping things. This side is not quite so neat. Hopefully you'll be able to get yours neater than mine, but it's neat enough for me, so I'm not going to undo it. But if it's not within your tolerance and you're unhappy, then you can always undo it and rejoin your stitches and then make sure that's right. It's not going to poke out, it's not going to see a frayed edge on the end, so I'm quite happy with that. And actually, whilst we've got our dark thread in our machine, I'm going to do my gathering stitches I think now as well, because that will work. So that's what our ribbon looks like, all lovely and neat. And the ends match, as I said. So next thing to do is we're going to do the gathering of the top of the skirt here. And what I need you to do is to lower the tension on your machine. Let me just move you up so you can see my machine. So generally speaking, you'll have what's called a tension dial, and this is what tightens your stitches so that you get a nice construction stitch that isn't going to pull apart. But sometimes if you're not, when you're doing a gathering stitch, we need to let that off so it's really loose and we can gather the stitches. So I'm going to take my tension down to a number 2. So generally speaking, I mean, have a look in your manual, but generally speaking, the lower the number, the looser the stitch is, so less tight it is. The other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to put it onto a straight stitch, but I'm going to take my stitch length up to a 5, which is my largest stitch, because we want big loose stitches to be able to gather. And if this is the first time you've ever had to gather, then you know, hopefully these tips you'll find them really helpful. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to open out the front facing, and we're just going to start from where that front facing is, and 1/4 of an inch down I'm going to sew a first line, one continuous line of stitches. It's going to sound funny because it's loose, but we want those stitches to be nice and loose. And I'm using a contrast thread so that when we remove the stitches we can see if we've got anything stuck. So what I'm going to do is line that up with so that I'm starting. And the other thing we do is we don't reverse and go backwards on our stitches when we're doing this type of thing. So we're just going to go here. I'm using the edge of the presser foot and the edge of my fabric and just start off. And now we know the top and the bottom of our skirt, we can get rid of our pin that was telling us that. We've got our trim now, haven't we, to tell us? So we're just sewing this stitch, and then the same at the other end, open out your facing. Ooh, gone a bit close to the top there. It's too busy talking. So where the fold is, we're going to stop right on that fold. Okay, or stitch just in front, that's fine. Leave long tails as well, okay? So if you've got a machine that cuts your threads for you, make sure that you've switched that off or you don't activate that because you need the tails to pull onto. And then when you've done that, we're going to go again and we're going to put another row of stitches. And I use the edge of my presser foot now. The only time that, okay, so when we come to sew these gathers together, we are actually going to sew it to the bodice in between the 2 rows of dark stitches. The only caveat I'd have to that is if you've got a really, really delicate fabric, so if you were doing this in a silk or in a satin, or something that is not going to recover from having the pinpricks in them from your needle. I know this cotton will do, but if that's not going to recover, then you might want to just think twice about doing this second row of gathering, or have it right where you're going to stitch. And I'll show you why with the gathering, because gathering is quite important and it's quite a good skill to understand. So I'm just going to do a second row now with a gap that's big enough for me to be able to stitch through. And no double starting and stopping or anything at the moment. No securing of the threads. So coming down to the end again, and then we're going to stop pretty much in the same place and leave ourselves some tails. So this is what we've got. We've got 2 rows, two rows of stitching, you can see there, and then they're quite loose and they're quite big, but that's on purpose. Okay, so let's just move the machine out of the way because we're going to not need that just for the moment. But before we do, we need to be aware though that we change our tension back, because you'll forget not to change it back. So whilst you're finished, let's take our tension. I usually sew about a 4.5 to a 5 on my tension. The stitch we can reset, and that doesn't matter so much, but the tension we need to know about, because if you stitch with that looser tension, you're not going to have any integrity in your seam. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're just going to mark where our reference points are. So we've got a notch here, because they're difficult to find once you've actually gathered it. So there's one notch there. So look for the next one. There's one notch here. So I'm just putting my red pins in where the notch is, because that'll tell me. We don't need to mark the centre front here because we've got that with our facing. And I've got another one here. So I'm just putting a pin in, not through my stitches, but just kind of avoiding the stitches. So we've got those 3 in there. One's for the centre back and 2 are for the side seams, and then this will meet up at the centre front. Then what I want you to do is get to the end where you've got your long threads. I tend to find that the bobbin thread actually pulls up better than the top thread. So I'll hold on to my bobbin threads. So I've just separated them out, look. So I've got the 2 threads in my hand together. And then I'm going to then just pull on them whilst holding on to the fabric between my finger and my thumb. And what you'll see is that as I pull on my threads and hold them tight, gathers start to form. But what you have to do is you have to just use your finger and thumb and move those gathers down into your skirt, really, or into the piece of fabric that you're gathering. You want to be careful not to make it too frayed, so don't be too gung-ho with it. But if you hold on to those stitches, those threads again, the bobbin threads, just leave your top threads just loose, that's fine. You don't need to do anything with those. Don't trim them off or anything, just leave them long. And then what we're going to do is we're going to gather from this side, and we're going to ease those gathers along to the centre pin, till we get towards our centre pin, which is there. Okay, and we can see our gathers are starting to form here. Now I want you to go to the other end and do exactly the same thing. So separate out, there's our top threads. I don't want to use those. And I want to use these bottom threads. You might find on your machine it's different, and that just use one or the other, but whichever one you use, make sure you use that one on both ends. And again, just by pulling on those threads and holding on to our fabric through with our finger and thumb, those gathers just start to pull along the thread and into the fabric. So we just gather it. It's a bit like when you have new curtains and you have to gather them up on a curtain header tape. It's the same principle as that. So again, we're just going to take these into the middle to meet that centre pin. And that's what we've got at the moment. So this is where we're going to work, and we can adjust these, but we've just started it off just to get where we're wanting to be. So the next thing we're going to do now is take our bodice and locate our centre notch. Mine's just here. And I'm going to put that right sides together with the centre notch on my skirt. So there's my notch, there's my red pin telling me where my notch is. And I put the pins in just so that it makes it easier. And then now I'm going to put this pin through both pieces of fabric, making sure that I've not got a tuck caught in the fabric. You want all of your gathers to be across. You don't want them to be twisted at all. Sometimes they can get twisted, like here. Can you see here? Look how that's kind of twisted and it wants to go off to that direction there. Compromise between having too much light and then having shadows, or not having enough light and not being able to see. So here we can see where these gathers are starting to twist, but if I hold on to the top of the fabric and just pull down, you can see how they all start to behave and start to go in the right direction. So we've got our fabric anchored at our centre back point. What I then want to do is go to one of the sides, and my lining is loose. You just go into the back of the bodice. Locate your side seam now, and then put your pin with your notch for your side seam right on top of that side seam, and then put your pin through both layers, just holding that still. So just stay clear of your threads. And then we're going to go to the other side now, and we're going to attach the other pin, the final pin, onto this side seam just here. If you're slightly off, it doesn't matter, but it's you know, if you can try and get it straight, it's good. Okay. The next thing then we're going to do is go to the front of our dress just here, and we're going to fold our, no we're not, we're going to just leave our facing free at the moment, and we're going to put the fold line of the facing and the notch that we had there right on the join of where our lining meets our bodice fabric. Just open it out with your fingers and then just put a pin on there as well, just to hold that. So that's our starting point for our gathers. And then go to the other end here, open out your facing, locate that notch, and then that notch is going to go on the edge just here as well. So match it all up. Okay, and I'm including the seam allowance in with the bodice rather than in with the lining. Use a red pin so that's easier to see. Okay, so the facing is free at the moment because we need to gather some of that, and we'll put that across in a minute before we actually sew it down, but we want the edge of the pin to be right on the corner of the facing. That's really important. Okay. So facing is free, and we can get access to our nice long threads that we've got now for our skirt. So then what we need to do now is, starting at the centre back, is we need to move some of these creases along, these gathers along, because at the moment, can you see that this skirt is bigger than the bodice one, the bodice piece of bodice that we're matching against. So and also we've got some flat spots in our gathers, so it's flat here and then tightly gathered here. And we're wanting to even those out, so you can now, just with your fingers, just move some of those gathers along, just to spread them out until, and then we need to tighten it up a little bit more. So if you need to tighten it, hold on to your threads, and then just move some more gathers in, and just move those along with your fingers, and eventually you can just move those. The gathers will move past the pins, so don't worry about those until get the lining out of the way, until your bodice actually fits the same length as your skirt. Once you're there, you can then even out your gathers. Give them a little tug as well, so that they're all sitting nice and straight to the skirt. And make sure you don't get a flat spot as well at centre back, because that's very common too, because you're avoiding your pin, but you need to have your gathers right up to your pin. So just move those along. And it's difficult to see on the stripy fabric, but on a plain fabric you'll see really clearly when you've got those all nice and straight and they're all nice. So I've got a little bit of a twist going on here, so I'm just going to adjust that. And then once I'm happy I'm going to take some more pins and just put a couple of pins in. Now we're going to sew this from the top of our skirt. Top of the skirt, yes, from the skirt side, not from the bodice side. So your bodice needs to be absolutely flat underneath between your pins that you've just put in. Just move that one because that's just a bit of a slant. And you're wanting all of your tucks to be sitting nice and straight and perpendicular to the floor and when it's worn. And just take your time now just to move anything that doesn't look like it's sitting straight, because it makes such a difference on the finished garment if you can do that. Okay, so then we go to the other side now of the back, and we're going to do exactly the same thing. So again, the skirt's too long at the moment, so locate your threads. If you've got this and you understand what you're doing, just fast forward on the video, but some people just like to see it a few more times. So I'm just going to cater for those people, as I try and do with all of my videos, cater towards the beginners, and then if you're an intermediate or you know what you're doing, you can just move it on. Move the video on. So again, now we've got the right length now for our skirt, because that matches. So now it's about making sure we've not got a flat spot at centre back, and then just about spacing those gathers out with our fingernails and our fingers, just to make sure that that still fits nicely. And then just give your skirt a tug so that all those pleats fall down straight, just fall straight. And then we're going to just put the pin in, and then another one in just here. And you can go back and tweak these as you're sewing as well, so it doesn't have to be final, but you want it to kind of be near enough if you can. You don't want to be agonising over it. Okay. And resist the urge to sort of go inside and try and pull it down, because you'll distort where the pins are and you might get a fold in the back here. The other thing that I think I'm going to do is just pin that top piece to the collar, so the lining to the collar, so it just keeps out the way for me as well. So I've just pinned that out the way so it's not going to get stuck in with my sewing underneath. Okay, so now we're down. So we've done the back. We've done to the side seam on both sides, so now we're doing these fronts. So again, just hold on to your long threads, make sure you've got the long ones, pull it in so that we're nearly there anyway, so there's the width, the same, two pieces of fabric are the same, and then just ease your gathers out so that they're just nice and neat. And then with this, we're just going to put our pins in again. Oops, throwing pins away. Just try and make sure there's no flat spots if you can. Oh, we've got a little bit more we need to just gather in there. That's better. That's it. And then once you're ready, just pop your pins in to hold those gathers in place. Just make sure your lining's out the way on the back. Again, pin central, but you know, we need to have these pins in to hold it straight. Once you've got to the end and you're happy with your gathers there, just fold your facing back flat over the top of your gathers, and making sure you've not got any of your lining mixed in with it. Just put a pin over the top, so you've almost doubled up on your pins on this facing bit, but we want that just to hold still. And that we don't want the facing to be gathered, but we want the facing to be over the top of those gathers when we finish the dress off. Okay, so we're nearly at the end now, so we go to the other side. And if you've got too many gathers, like here, so I've got too many gathers, just pull them off towards the end of the string, and it'll ease it out, and just put a bit more fabric between those. A bit more fabric between. Sometimes I don't think I make much sense, but you all seem to follow me okay, so okay. So just ease these out. So I've got a flat bit there, so I can just move those along without making the string any longer. So another pin. And then a bit further along. And this is the same whether I'm gathering adult clothing or children's clothing or home decor, frill on a home decor item. This same principle applies. And then we'll make sure we're right at the end. Make sure your lining is out of the way. And then again on that edge, making sure that the skirt goes right to the edge of the facing. Just going to put a couple of extra pins in to hold that facing down over the top of the gathers. So the facing isn't gathered because we left that out of the gathering stitches, and we want that facing just to sit straight on top of the thing. So this is what we've got. We've got our long threads, so don't cut those off, leave those as they are. And then because we've got our pins in, that's holding all of our gathers in place where we want those to be. And now holding on to the gathers with our fingers, we can just pull the skirt down, and that just makes sure that all of those gathers are straight and that they're not getting twisted. Okay, so from the inside, the inside of the bodice is all flat, all the way along. Our facings are folded flat over the top of our gathers. So the skirt might be gathered underneath your facing, but the actual facing itself is flat over the top. And I've just pinned my lining out of the way, because what we're going to do next is we're going to put this into the sewing machine with our lining out of the way of our stitches, and we're going to stitch in between. I don't care whether you're slightly higher up here or not. What does Sarah say? What kind of seam allowance has she left on the skirt? Sarah has allowed for in the pattern, which pretty much takes you right in the middle of here, right in the middle of your two lines, which is pretty perfect, isn't it, really? So what you need to do now is change your thread colour back to your white. So I'm going to put this into the machine, holding the lining out of the way. Can you see okay? Yeah, I think you can. And then watching out for your pins. So once you get to your skirt underneath here, you'll be right on the edge and making sure that you're lining up with 1 centimetre seam allowance. Just bring your skirt round. You're not going to be able to bring it all the way around because it's pulling on the lining. Once it's under your presser foot, I'm going to take out the pins that were there. I don't want to sew over those pins. And I'm going to take a couple of stitches forward and a couple of stitches back. And I'm on a straight stitch, and I'm going to put my needle in my work because we might need to lift it up and adjust things. So just check underneath that there's no lining, so you can see my lining's here right out the way. I'm just going through the bodice and through the sort of bottom of the bodice and also my skirt. And as I'm sewing, you can see I'm holding my pleats down, my gathers down, and I'm just pulling on my skirt slightly. So take the pins out as you get close to those. Got the needle in the works, that's holding it nice and still, and just take your time and just readjust as you need to. Take those pins out, there's quite a few, but just take it nice and steady. If you do need to adjust any, if you spot any flat spots, then you can just use your fingernail just to ease those gathers along. So this is probably one of the most, well, this and the trim on the bottom, I think, are two of the most important parts of this skirt. And if you can see, I'm just sewing right through the middle of the 2 lines of stitching here, of the gathering stitches. Again, we want the skirt to be nice and even. I just noticed there where some gathers are not lying straight, where they're getting a bit bunched up, so I can just move them along. If you use the point of your awl as well, you can just move those along and just make sure that's sitting nicely. Because sometimes the presser foot, as it's trying to get on them, it moves the stitches out of the way. Just make sure you've not got your lining caught. Make sure everything's all lined up, all your raw edges are together. So just pull this down. Again, it's just taking your time, isn't it? And just making sure you're happy. Make sure your skirt is straight down. Those pleats are all lying how you want them to. And that your raw edges of your bodice are matching up as well. And the other thing that's important to do is make sure that when you, so we're coming up now, let's make sure, oh, have I just started to catch my bodice? My lining, and I have. So I'm just going to take my machine out because I've just noticed that I was just catching my bodice. So I've not returned. You see, I've just started to catch that. So now I'm just going to go back to one stitch before it and then just undo those stitches. Too busy watching my pleats and my gathers and not watching the thing. The other thing you could do is pleat this skirt as well, isn't it? That's the other thing. So let's hold that out of the way. We can see where I was when I stopped stitching. So let's just take that back. So I go to where I was just stitching, just before I was stitching. So I'm going over where I've already stitched, a couple of stitches forward, a couple of stitches back, just to hold on to that. And now I'm still making sure that I've got my lining out the way as I just roll that all forward. Sometimes it's good when I make these mistakes just so that you can see how I cope with them, and it's just part of ordinary sewing and normal sewing. So just making sure that that's just all finishing right on the top there and at the edge of the lining, because again this is a match point, isn't it, for our stitching. Our dress. So up to the edge but not over, and then just reverse stitch again. And then take off the threads, and the joining threads ready there. So this is what we've got now. So hopefully you can see we've got a row of gathering stitches here and a row of gathering stitches here. And then right in the middle there I've got my white thread for my stitching that's securing all of these gathers down in place. And if we look to the other side, there's our row of gathering stitches there still in the fabric, and there's our row of, and there's our bodice stitched on with our pleats all really nice and neatly sewn in. So hopefully we've not got any flat spots. Hopefully you're happy with it. If you're not happy with it and you think that, excuse me, and you think that you could redo in place, leave your gathering stitches in until you know you are happy, because what if it's easier at the moment to check this and to make sure you're all happy. We don't have any puckers on the underneath of the bodice, so we're checking that that's all nice and flat and neat on the bodice. We're checking that our lining matches up nicely with our bodice on the front facing there, and again here, so that one's slightly better than the other side. But again, when we fold this in and neaten this off, you won't see it anyway, so that's fine. We can make that adjustment. So just make sure you've got no puckers in your bodice and you've got no flat spots in your gathers. When you're happy that that's the case, what I tend to do is go to the middle of the garment and just go through where my tacking thread was that I pulled, and I go through the gathering stitches, because then what you can do is go back to the beginning here where your long threads are. Take the longer ones, and because we've not stitched through those gathering threads, when we pull on one of them we can just pull it straight out of the garment, and again with the other one we can just pull on it and it comes straight out. And then if we go to the other two threads, pull on those and they just pull out as well. Then we go to the other side and pull on the other two. You can do them together if you want. I tend to do them one at a time, but yeah, you can do them together. Oops, want to stick to me, electricity. And then just pull those out as well. What you might find you have to do is, because we want, right, so let me just correct myself. So the reason why we have the two lines of thread that we use is because it makes sure that these stitches here, so the gathers in between, don't start to twist and get caught up. If you don't do that, then you run the risk of a gather sort of puckering up and going behind another one, and that was the way. There's little pinpricks in the fabric, but if you just run your fingernail over them, they'll just disappear, and when you go to press it and what have you, they should all disappear. But there we've got a lovely, neatly attached bodice onto our dress. So we can now release the lining. Come out, just put the machine out the way for a second. Because what we're going to do now is we're going to match our centre seams first, and we're going to go to the inside of the dress, and we're going to turn up the bottom of the lining by a small amount, and that's determined by whatever this kind of how it feels. You want it to be flat, and then we're going to put a pin in. So we're tucking that raw edge of the lining up inside the bodice, and again at the front here we're going to make that nice and flat. So I've got the skirt and the in one hand of the bodice, and we're folding that lining around the edge of that skirt and bodice, folding the lining up. If you've got any raw edges, just or any fraying, just take those bits off. Don't need any of those fraying bits. Just neatening it up really. So that's that bodice again on that edge. Fold it right round nice and neatly so you get a lovely neat finish, and then tuck up the edge of the bodice in underneath and put a pin in. So I'm putting the pins in along the hem, not wanting to go in. Give it a twist if it doesn't want to go in, that usually helps. Because you're wanting a lovely straight finish down here on this. Oh, I've got a good pattern match in there, look at that, those match up nicely. Completely incidental. And then if you do need to lose any of this, because this is feeling like it's a little bit bigger, then I will lose that on the centre seam. I'll put just a slight little tuck at the point where it's meeting underneath at the side seam. So here, and just ease that along slightly just so it sits nice and flat. It should, if we've used the same seam allowances, then the two bodices should lie on top of each other lovely and neat. So if you look from the inside of the dress, you can see that we're going to just hand stitch the edge of this folded edge of the bodice down to those stitches holding the skirt on, and that will just neaten that off really nicely. So what we're doing is we're hiding all of this on the inside, and we haven't got any of this facing flapping around, because our facing is our lining and it comes down and it's going to enclose that seam. So it's going to give you a much nicer finish on the inside. So the same thing over here again, we're just going to do the same thing. So I'm just going to fold that seam allowance up into the bodice, and then whatever that seam allowance is, you're going to fold it back round onto the front of it again, onto the front of your dress. Tuck all your gathers up inside so that sits all nicely. And I'm going to just put a pin to hold it flat and hold it still. And we're going to move along to the underarm, and the underarm seam should pretty much match. It might just be a millimetre or so out, but that's okay. And then we're going to put another pin in here. I'm just going to go all the way along. If you've got any little fraying edges, just put those out the way. Find your little notch for your centre back, and find the notches for your centre back here. This just makes sure that your lining doesn't get twisted. Again, it's the same on adult clothing as well. And put those marks together, and that's your centre point for the pin. Hold that steady. And it doesn't matter if your lining is a little bit looser than so the length is a little bit shorter, or a little bit longer than you need. What you need to make sure is it isn't shorter, because if it's shorter, let me just put this pin in one so I think about what I'm saying. So what you want is the lining to lie flat against the bodice on the front and on the back, so that those are the same. If you pin this so that this here is shorter, you'll get a bulge in the back of the dress here, because this fabric can't sit straight, because this fabric is not allowing it to, the lining fabric isn't allowing it to. So we're just trying to make sure that when we turn this up, the bodice has enough. So just put your hands on the collar on the neckline and just give it a little pull, and just smooth it down, and that will kind of tell you with your fingers underneath whether or not it's straight or not. And then again, I'm just putting another pin in to hold that down. And then a little bit of excess at this side seams, but that's fine. We can ease that in as we're going along. So that's what it looks like. This is the inside. If you remember, that's our lining. And then from the outside, this is how our dress is looking with our lovely trim on the back of it. So all we're going to do now is just thread up a needle with either a pale blue thread or with a white thread, and then I'm just going to hand stitch the folded edge of the lining down to this part here on the dress. And because we've already neatened off the arms in the same way, you can see that just gives a really lovely finish on the inside of the dress. So look at that. Okay, got a little bit of a crinkle there, but I think once I start to sew that on, that will be fine. And I might go back and just neaten this up because that might bug me a little bit. But I'll, in fact, I will do. I'll go back and neaten that up, and I'll show you how I do that, because that might be something that happens to you as well. So let me just hand sew this this bodice down first, and then we'll just correct my mistake and put that straight, and then we'll carry on again with the rest of it. So okay, I'll be back in a few minutes. Okay, so I've just finished sewing the inside lining down, so that's looking all nice and neat now, and happy with that. So really it's just this little bit here. If you're not bothered about finding out how I change this, then just fast forward on to the next bit, because we're going to be talking about putting the press studs and the buttons down the front in the next bit, but I've chaptered it so you'll be able to see. For those that do want to know how to correct something like this, it just takes a bit of patience. And what I'm going to do is I am going to take back my stitching to about here, and then I'm going to readjoin this, because now that it's off anyway. So where I go to first is I want some nice long tails to be able to knot off down here. So what I'm going to do is start back here before I get to my sort of like double stitching, if you like, where I cast off. And then I'm just going to use my quick unpick, just the point of it, just to go underneath those stitches and just to ease them out. I want a long thread on them. That's what I want. And then when I get to a certain point, I'm going to turn over and very carefully find where the stitches are on the other side, and they're so well hidden, but you can usually get your quick unpick underneath and find. And then I want to break that off, but with this long tail, because what I want to do then is I want to pull on this edge here. Let's have a think. No, I'm going to pull on this side actually, because it's dark blue, isn't it? And I'm going to pull this thread up so there's a little loop. If I pull it over to the side there, look, you can see there's a loop where the stitch was formed underneath. Hopefully you can see that. Just there. And I put my quick unpick in there. Don't cut it off, pull it out. So I've got both threads on the top now. Now I will ease the two sides of the ribbon away from the dress, and I will pull on one thread and then pull on the other so that I get the two loops on the inside of that ribbon, and then I'm going to pull on them both. So both of those pieces of thread now from that unstitching are both on the inside of where that ribbon is. So then what I do is, very carefully, excuse my big fingers, is I'm going to tie a knot in that. I use the end of the quick unpick just to locate the thread, because it's easier than using my fingers. I'm just going to tie that tight into 3 knots. 1, 2, 3. And then going to leave those fairly long, but just take off about a little bit of it. And then I'm just going with the nose of my quick unpick, I'm just going to just push those in underneath the thread. So on the top my stitch stops dead, and on the inside my stitch stops dead, and those threads and knots are hidden on the inside of that ribbon. So now we're going to do the other one. So I'm going to go back here again to where the thread is and where we can have a nice long tail, and wherever I can just get underneath the stitch. Not sure that's it, so let's go from this side first. So I'm actually going to go back to where we start, where the other one is. So I want to start here, don't I? Because again, it's not going to show so much on the wrong side. Oops, I'm having trouble locating it because it's very dark. It's a very good match, this thread is, onto this ribbon. Right, I can't find it, so let's go to the end here. So I'm going to break the thread there and then unpick my stitches back to where the other one is. Use the back of your unpick, not near the blade, and it won't break off for you because you want to be able to knot these stitches. And then on the other side we can now just use our fingernail and it'll just pull those stitches out and we'll be able to find the thread. And again we want a long tail. So again we're going to go to the inside of our ribbon and our dress, find those loops where the stitch was formed and use the quick unpick to loosen it off so we can see that the threads, and then when you've got your two threads there, you can then put your quick unpick through and just pull the threads out. These are tinier, so they're a little bit more challenging, but again we can just use the edge of the quick unpick. Oops. Carefully. Get hold of the thread when it behaves itself. Obviously that's why I wanted to try and leave longer threads if I can do, because it's easier to manhandle if they're longer. Okay, sorry if I'm boring you. I'll try and get a move on with this. But basically what I'm going to do is knot these threads off again and hide them under that ribbon. So again we've got our thread stopping dead in our sewing, and we've not got any knots on the outside, and we've not got any knots showing on the inside of the skirt. Oops. There we go. That's got us two anyway. And then we can just use the quick unpick to just swipe those threads underneath and you won't see those at all. Believe me. Right, let's go to the end here. So now we've eased off some of those, we can just ease this back and get to where those stitches were, and we can ease off through the centre here where the old threads are for the double tacking, and it's easier to see from the inside. We can just break those off. I don't need to tie those off at all because it's not in the right position. So just go down towards the edge and it all starts to come undone for us, which is great. That's what we want. Okay. Can you hear me concentrating? Right, so we've got the looser threads, and there's our threads for our knots underneath our fabric, there underneath the ribbon there. So we can just kind of, if we just wet the ends, they'll just kind of tie in together so that they can just lie along the line that we're going to need. Take out your old threads, because we don't need those in. Want it all nice and neat. Okay. So the first thing that I'm going to do now is match up where we want this thread to the ribbon to continue, to make sure that that's nice and straight. So that wants to be there. So I'm going to now just put a pin along the length of that ribbon, excluding the facing, because we need the facing open so that we can go behind it. There's a bit of thread left in there. Let's get that out. Okay, let me just measure that again because it might have moved. Yeah, it's just slightly down, so I need that end just to be slightly up. Right, so I'm happy with where that is on the front. So now I'm going to just fold that over the edge, just watch the edge of your pin. And then we've got the tram lines of the other one to be able to show this is going to be too long. That's probably why we struggled a little bit, so take a little bit more of that off. And then we want to, holding onto the edge of the dress with your finger and thumb, fold that back so it tucks underneath. But you want it to be in line with these two lines of stitching here so that it's going to get caught when those 2 lines of stitching are resumed. So I'm going to twist off one way or the other. Okay, it's certainly neater than it was. Okay, so once I've got that, so holding on to that again, I'm now going to put my pin in on this edge, just at a right angle to the ribbon. Again, I'm going to match it. Yeah, that's fine. And I'm going to put another pin towards the end here, so that holds that placement line as well. Okay, so we've got that ribbon kind of secured down now. So I just need to put a little pin where my stitching is, so I can see the ribbons loose up until pretty much that point just there. So if I just put my pin in just behind that, then I know where I'm starting. Make sure your threads are tucked underneath so you've got your nice finish on one side and on the other. I am going to have to rethread my machine with my darker thread again. So I'm going to leave some long tails on my threads again because I want to tie this off so that it's almost invisible. And what I'm going to do, where's my glasses, because this is close work, is I'm going to locate pretty much where that stitching stopped with the last stitch, and I can see it a little bit better under here under my light, and hopefully you might not be able to see it. Hold on 1 second. There we go, move that out of the way. Right, and so what I'm going to do now is with my needle and holding onto my threads is I'm going to lower the needle down to whereabouts that last thread just finished. If it's a stitch off, I'm not going to worry because I'm not going to see it on this navy. As you could see, it was really difficult to see where it had actually started off. So I'm going to put my presser foot down now, I'm now in the right place, and take that pin out from the back there. I'm then going to only sew forward. I'm not going to reverse sew. So I'm just going to sew forward again. So I need to change my stitch length because we were on a stitch length 3, weren't we, before? Find my pedal and then slowly go forward. When I get to that and put my needle in my work. When I get close, because now my presser foot is holding onto the ribbon, I can take out the pin, making sure not to change the placement of my ribbon, but that's why we've got this pin here as well. And then I'm going to sew to the edge till we get close to the pin and take that one out, and then I'm going to sew off the edge. I'm not reversing. Needle up, and I'm going to leave some tails. Then I'm going to do the same on the other row of stitching. So if you look on the inside, can you see I'm literally just half a stitch off there from where I was. Hopefully you can see on this bottom row here. Look, here's the stitch that the stitches I've just made, but I've caught the bottom of that ribbon again now. So holding those threads out of the way, because they're going to be long and going to get in the way if you're not careful, but we want those to be free because we need to work with those in a minute. I'm going to again line up the needle and just hand lower it down if you need to, just to make sure you're in the right place. Right, I'm going to stay there, okay, and I'm now going to just sew this next stitch. Again, I'm not reversing, and off the edge and leave some threads. So again, there we can see I'm just a slightly further off on that one, but I'm not going to worry. So the next thing that we're going to do then is get a hand sewing needle, because what we want to do is pull all of these threads to the top. So you can see there's a loop there for a stitch. So I pull that one and bring that one through, and I'm going to pull this one here. Just give it a little tug on the thread if you need to, and it'll just make the loop a little bit bigger so you can catch that with your needle, and just pull that out. And then what I do then is I then tie this off, probably only with a double knot this time. Just make sure it's nice and secure. And it's going to be nice and tight. And then cut those threads off so they're the same length, because that's easier to thread. And then what I do is, on this side, I'm going to put my needle in where that knot is, and I'm going to go down through the hem alongside where that hem is turned over. So I'm not going through to the other side, I'm just going along to follow where that hem is for a little while, and then I'm going to push my needle out and I pull my threads through. That's it. And then I'm going to take the ends in as well. Give it a little pull and the little knot should pretty much go in. If it doesn't, don't worry too much because it'll still be secure. And then put some tension on those threads and then just snip it off. And that will just take the ends of them into the fabric. So again here, I'd only be one stitch away. I wouldn't be more than one stitch. If you need to, you can always hand sew one stitch in if you need to. But you've got to be that close if you can to make this work properly. Otherwise you're going to have like a hole in the trim of your lace, and that's where the dress could get snagged. And then the same again here. So this time I'm going between, so we've got a little bit of fabric here at the end of the hem, and behind that we know is the ribbon. So we're going to put our needle in between the fabric and the ribbon and just slide it along until we get to that other place that we were at before. I'm going to turn it over so you can see I'm not on the ribbon and I'm not on the actual go all the way through. I'm just between, so like in the channel that's caused between these two rows of stitching. And again, pull our ends through and give it a little tug. And that should tighten that off and make that nice and neat. And then I'm just going to now put a little bit of tension on those threads and cut them, and they're off and they've disappeared off. So what we've done here is we've actually joined our stitches together, because there's like one stitch different there, but on the front I'd challenge anybody to find that really, unless they're being a judge in a competition or something. It's not going to compromise the integrity of the ribbon because the ribbon's still pretty much securely tied on. But then I'm going to do exactly the same with these now. I'm going to pull these threads through to the back so we've not got anything loose on the front. I'm going to knot them off and then I'm going to put them behind that ribbon and channel those in. So hopefully that's helpful to somebody. I know that it's looks a bit tedious, and you know, people start shouting at me, oh, you've got too much patience, Claire. But I think when you see what it's possible to do in terms of how to correct these things, and I mean, that's so much neater than it was before. And if I'd wanted to, I could have done a one stitch on the other side by hand and just join in exactly to the end of that one to that one, and that would have worked as well. And so here we're just going to pull out that loop again, pull it through, and then I'm going to knot these off because they're not going to fray, and then just feed those through into there. But you don't need to see because you already know what we're doing. But then you can see now we've got two really lovely neat ends where the ends of the ribbon are tucked in behind the facing and they're not ever going to fray. So hopefully that's helpful. I'll just tidy this bit up and then we're talking about buttons. Okay, so I've just been looking all over my sewing room trying to find press studs, and as you can see I've got several different sizes. This is the size that I think that I would want to use. Okay, which are approximately, don't know what size they are, 6mm across I think. And this is the size that I think I'm going to have to use, which is just slightly smaller, which I know are the 000 size. So I'm going to use this little, because I don't want to put black ones on, I wanted to use the silver if I could. But I've only got a couple of those in the right size. As I said, I've got to pick some more up when I'm in the UK. I can get them from here, but I can get them from a wholesaler in the UK. So I'm going to just sew on one lot of press stud to show you, and buttons, because the process is just repeated for the 5 times that you need. So there's one press stud on the actual top, and then the rest are on the dress. Now, for a girl, traditionally, you would then have, if you hold the dress up against you, you would have right over left in terms of getting the placement right. So my buttons are going to go on the right-hand side of the dress. So if we just lay this just down just nicely, that all matches up beautifully. And we're just going to play with some buttons because I've got some navy blue ones here. So that's one option, which looks quite nice. They're not quite the right kind of shade of navy. So let's just take those off for a moment, because again it's just auditioning the buttons up and seeing what looks nice. I've got these little ones here which are the white ones, look quite nice too. So again you can choose what you think looks the best for your dress. I'll probably end up going with the white. And I also got these little lovely little love heart ones, and of course you can get novelty ones, you get little anchors, You can get all sorts of things for those. But I think I'm going to end up using the navy ones because I think that's what's going to enhance the dress the best. But a lot of these buttons I just save off old garments that I've got. So I'm going to sew the button on first, so to get that placement right, and then I'll sew the press stud on underneath. So I'm going to use a navy thread for doing that, and a hand sewing needle. The press stud will then hide pretty much the threads from sewing on the from the button. So I'm going to use a double thread, just so it's quicker to anchor it on. And obviously you could use poppers as well if you wanted to, and just make the dress with poppers. By poppers I mean like plastic snaps, like cam snaps. So let's take off the end of the threads. And then we need to kind of work out where we want these buttons to be. We have got the button placement on the skirt. So that's how Sarah would have had it. So we can put a pin on each of those if we wanted to. Or you might have made a tailor's tack for the centre of each of your buttons. So let me just see how far these are apart. 1.5 inches apart, each of those. So Sarah's got one on the bodice as well. I haven't got my bodice pattern piece, yes I have. It's here, look. So she has one button just at the top of the V there, and then she's got 4 down the skirt. So she doesn't have one on the waist. So let's put this one on the top first, the V. I'm going to just do it just slightly lower. And I'm going to make sure I've got my holes going across. So I'm going to take a stitch first underneath where the button's going to be, because that will then hide my knot underneath my button. Just checking that you can see what I'm doing. Making a mess with thread is what I'm doing at the moment. And then I put my button onto my thread so that it can't ping off, because as you know, things like to ping off on me. And then making sure that all my holes on my buttons are going to go straight across the width of the dress. Then I can just go into the dress underneath where I want this one to go. Then that just holds it tight for me. And now I can actually do the securing stitches to hold that on. So I'm putting this onto the right hand side of the bodice as worn. So I just held it up to me, because I always get mixed up with that, but I held it up to me and then sewed it onto the right hand side. So that's the button on. I've done a few backwards and forwards through that. And I'm going through the lining as well, so we've just got the dark thread there. And then I'm going to then just take a few stitches through my stitches that I've just done, which is how I just sort of knot it off. Put a few stitches together, all on top of each other, and then I make a little loop. And then I'm going to put one stitch through and then through. But make sure your loop's quite tight, because otherwise it does it cinches in quite quickly, that knot does. And then you can't get it tight enough and you have to start again. So the other thing that I'm going to do now is have a needle threaded, a fine needle threaded with a white thread too, because I'm going to sew my press stud on underneath. Little quarters knot on the end there. There is a video on my channel how to do that if you want to have a little look. And then snip off the end, so we've got a very short end after the knot. I'm then going to choose one of my press studs. I'm going to use the deeper one of the two to hide the button placement. So, oops, can't lose that. That's only one of the only ones I've got. So I'm going to take a stitch now with my white thread underneath the navy threads that we've just done, and that'll anchor my knot underneath. And where have I put it? It's here. And then I'm going to go through one of the holes on the sides of the press stud. And then with your fingernail, I just hold that over the top of the stitches that I've made for the button. Tuck your knot underneath, so make sure that's underneath. And then I'm going to take a stitch out of the bodice of this dress, because that's underneath the lining, and then come back up through the hole in the press stud. It will sort of pull off a bit until it's secured down. But with a little bit of practice and manipulation, you'll be able to get that to sit down just nicely for you. Just pull your threads to make sure that they've not got any loops or anything anywhere. and then I'm going to do the same again. So a little bit of bite of the bodice under the button, so the stitches are hidden underneath the back of the button, and then back through the hole on the press stud. I do about 4 or 5 stitches on each hole. There's 4 holes on the press studs that I use, and you just have to be aware that as time goes on it gets tighter because of the threads in there. So just do what you need to do just to feel that secure. Then when I'm ready, making sure your press stud is still straight, I then go in and come out in through the bodice and come out through the next placement for the next hole. Take a stitch through the hole. Make sure your button is hiding the stitches and navy from your button. This bite of the bodice, and then come underneath and come out again. So I kind of don't do it all in one stitch because I find that a little bit tricky, and it isn't always as neat. So it does take a little bit longer, but I think it's worth it. I was just making sure you're trying to keep those stitches hidden behind your button. There's another one. And then travel on to the next place, and you just carry on doing that around your press stud, and if you've got your press stud right, it'll hide completely all of the stitches that you made when you attached your button, so you've not got any of that on show on the inside, which again makes it really nice and neat for you. So if you think you're going to go outside of the placement of your button, just go through your lining fabric only, and that should enable you just to put that on. It gets a bit tighter the more stitches you've got in place. And just one more set of holes to go. It has moved slightly, but it's still pretty much covering the stitches from the button. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm done that on one side, and then I am then going to then work out where the corresponding part of the other bit of the press stud needs to go. And then I'll stitch that one on in a similar fashion as well, but I'm just going to, on that one, I'll just go through the outer. You can go into the lining because that's just going to go across there like that, and just make that nice and neat. And then once we've got those buttons on, then we can make the toggle for the dress, can't we, just here, and you can choose whether you're going to do it in navy or whether you're going to do it in the striped fabric, and we'll talk about that. But then then we're done. That'll be it, all finished. So I'm just going to finish this off by doing a few stitches through the fabric and just underneath my stitches I've just done. So a lot of work in this little dress, but it's so sweet. It really is worth it to get it right. As I say, just a few stitches behind under here, and that will hold that on. Okay, so let's snip those threads nice and tight. So yeah, so I'll just hold this one over. Make sure that your waist seam matches as well. So make sure you get your waist seam is more important than the top bit here, because that waist seam has got to match at that point there, that junction there, because then when the dress is worn all the way down, then you can see that matches up beautifully as well onto the bottom of the dress there and the bottom there. So it all just really does just match in beautifully. Okay, let me just finish sewing these on and we'll talk about the toggle. Okay, so here's Clementine now in her dress. The sleeves fit nice. They are snug, but they do fit. So just so that you know for your character as well. And she's made out of the cool crafting felt. I think she's looking quite smart. So last thing that we've got to do now is just do the toggle for the actual sailor's top. And as I said to you before, I find it quite a struggle to use the loop piece that's in the book. Let me just see if I can, I don't think I can find, I think I've lost the loop bit. But let me just look in the book because I can show you what. So it's this tiny bit just here. And I think that you're probably better off working with something bigger and then cutting it down to size. The other thing that might look nice as well is similar to what I did with the trial dress, covered in threads, which is to use a little bit of the trim from the skirt to make the loop. So you could do the same with the ribbon. Not that colour. That was lavender in case I used lavender. And you could do a little tie in the navy if you wanted to. Or if you wanted to use the stripe, then what I would do personally is I would cut something bigger than this and then cut it down. Okay, so I've got my piece of fabric here, and my piece that I've cut out is just under 2 inches by just over 2 inches. So it's just not quite a square. And what I'm going to do is going to fold it in so that we're almost like we're making bias binding. So let's fold the 2 edges in, and then let's fold it in half again. So that's going to give us a finished toggle that's about that kind of width, which on Clementine I think looks quite nice. So just to show you again, so I've folded both raw edge ends into the middle, and then I've folded them both over each other again. And just make sure you've got your stripes going the right way so that when you offer it up to your character, it's the striped. I want it to go in the other way to the way the skirt is going. And then what I'm going to do is just on the edge of the toggle, I'm just going to do one row of stitches down this way on the edge in white thread. Snip off that threads. And then on the other side, just to make it nice and even, just so it's just decorative this side is, but just make it nice and even. Okay. Now you are going to have raw edges on the edge of these toggle, but we're going to fold it round, and then we'll find a way of tucking those under. I think I'm going to hand stitch this close because I think it'll be so much easier than trying to do it by machine. But I think that that's what I will end up doing, and easier than trying to turn it round as well. So I think that what I've done is I've folded one end in to give me a nice little neat edge, and then I'm then going to fold it in the other edge and put one over the top of the other. If you want to zigzag, so it gives me just 2 nice edges there just to sew together. If you wanted to zigzag the ends of those bits closed, you could do before you started. And then what you need to find then is a hand sewing needle. Oh, let's pop a pin in just to hold that still because that's where I want it to be. And it doesn't want to, oh it does, it will do. Okay, so that's just holding that steady for me. That's what it's going to look like when it's finished, which I think is quite a good size. And again, you know, what Sarah's put in the book is a good indication of what you might want to do, but there's nothing to say you've got to follow it to the letter, because sometimes things are a little bit complicated to sew, aren't they, if they're all together. So let me just thread this hand sewing needle. Let me put the machine out of the way because we've finished with that now. Right, so all that we need to do now is got our needle and thread. Going to hide the knot in behind here. I'll put my thimble on because sometimes these thin needles do like to stab me. And then I'm going to do a few stitches just between, holding those together, just between those 2 edges. I'll take the pin out now because we've got that held. Just holding that together. And just over the edge. You can try and machine sew it then turn it, but I think that's a bit fiddly. It certainly was when I tried it anyway, so I think that this is going to work better for me. So again, I'm just hand sewing using the end of my thimble to push, because it's quite stiff, to push the needle through. And if you've not had a thimble before, this one's really good. It's got like a silicone cup to it. You can get them in different sizes because my fingers are quite large. And then it's got this metal cup on the end that you can then use just to push your needle through should you need to when it's on stiff fabrics like this one. So basically just going to do a few stitches like this just through, just holding that together. And just over the edge. If you wanted to, you can try and hold that together a bit more inside if you wanted to, but it's not, you're not going to see that once it's on. And as I said before, if the doll isn't for just for display purposes, you might want to stitch the when you've got your scarf all nice and neat, you know, the scarf ties, you might want to consider stitching it onto one of your tie pieces through the back, just so that it doesn't ever get lost, because I can imagine that this little bit would get really easily lost. Okay, so once you're happy with that, a couple of stitches just to hide the threads. Oh, as I say, it's really thick fabric. Well, it's thin fabric, but it's quite dense. So it just pulls on the stitches a bit. So that's that. So now all that is needed is, come here Clementine, and then you might have some, I know quite a lot of people use what they're called hermostat tweezers. These aren't, but again we can just take the end of that and then just use the tweezers to push it through. And then go on to the other one and do the same thing. I found it easier to use the tweezers to push through rather than to pull through. And then if we just move that further up. So this one's slightly bigger than, as I say, in the book, but I think it's slightly easier to do. And then if you just arrange Clementine so that she's got her dress and her ties are how you want them to be for your character. And then if you wanted to, you could just then lift that up and just put a few stitches on the back of your toggle. Just pull that to the back there. So you just on the back of the toggle here and just attach it onto one part of the dress. You could then take it off to get her changed if you wanted to, but at least you wouldn't then lose the toggle. Okay, let me just twist the camera back round again and we'll just do a little bit of a roundup of Clementine in her lovely dress, and thank our sponsors again for this video. So I hope you've enjoyed watching the video today. Here's Clementine in her lovely dress, and as you can see it matches nicely at the waist. We've got the lovely toggle on there that we've free-formed on that one, but just because it was just too fiddly with the other one, in my opinion. You might have managed, but I chose to make life easier. We've got our beautifully edged, matched up skirt. Now, disclaimer, there are some pins holding her dress together until I can get my press studs, but as you know, we've got a beautifully finished hem. We've got that fully lined bodice that's neatened around the top of the sleeves. She's got her little cuffs on the edge of her dress, and I think she looks really smart. I really do like this dress very much. I think it's lovely, a lovely straight collar on the back there. And beautiful gathers as well, as I said, around the skirt, and showing you how to do that. Probably could do with a bit of a press, but that's all, and it's all done. So I just wanted to say thank you for joining me today. I know this one's been quite a long video, but there's been a lot of detail to cover in here, and I hope that you feel that by including the detail that it helps you elevate your makes, and just you can understand how the finish is put together then to get it right. Let me get my list, because I just want to thank our sponsors again. Jessica Wilding, thank you so much, and Jackie Powell as well, thank you Jackie too, on behalf of me, of everybody else who's going to watch this video in the years to come and enjoy making their sailor's dress for their Luna. If you'd like to, there is a Facebook group that I've got that follows the follows the channel really, and provides sewing support. It isn't just on Luna Lapin, because I don't just do Luna Lapin characters and sew-alongs, and of course I'm just a quick shout out to Sarah Peel of Cool Crafting, because the design for the animals and the outfits all belong to Sarah. I'm just recreating what she's put in the book. So you can get the books from coolcrafting.co.uk. I'll put the link up here, and Sarah has got a dedicated Facebook group for Lunar Lapin called Lunar Lapin's Little World by Cool Crafting on Facebook, so you can go along and join that, and there's heaps of inspiration and lots of lovely makes in there. However, I kind of struggled a bit with that because I'm not able to offer the help that I want to, and I felt I was kept explaining things over and over again rather than being able to point people to the Facebook to the YouTube channel. So in a conjunction with my YouTube channel, I've got an interactive platform on Facebook. It's just called Sewing by Claire Sewing Support Group, and what it means is that you can ask me questions, you can post your makes. It doesn't just cover Lunar Lapin, it covers quilting, dressmaking and cross stitch as well, applique, all sorts of things that I'm also interested in, but you'll find some Lunar Lapin help in there as well should you need it. So pop along and ask to join if you would like to, if you're active on Facebook, and I'd be very happy to see you and welcome you there. Thank you so much to everybody for watching, and from Clementine and I, have a great day. Take care everybody and happy stitching. Bye.